we continue our conversation on the racial incident at the Stellenbosch University that sparked widespread outrage. To discuss the issue, psychological impact of racism both in society and schools, I'm joined by Deborah Olusola, clinical psychologist. Deborah, very good afternoon. Thanks so much for speaking to us. Now, I'd like to quote Edwin Cameron in his installation recently. All these things are what our national sense of dignity and self-worth entitles us to object against, to claim better, end of quote. Now, just how much self-worth would a person going through such remain with after this incident, and how do they recover from it?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all your viewers out there. I mean, looking at this particular context at Stellenbosch, we have to look at the fact that somebody's human rights and dignity was violated. And it's definitely going to have, it was embarrassing, it was a violation, and it was on the grounds of, it was more like animalistic, barbaric. And so the receiver, the victim, he is going to feel a certain way. He's going to feel like he was completely disregarded, rejected. He's going to feel some kind of contempt. So that's going to affect his self-worth. He's going to have a lot of, sorry?
No, please carry on.
Yes, so it's going to make him question a lot of things about himself, because he's going to wonder, why did this happen to me? Why me? And it was quite a dehumanizing act of human qualities and his dignity at the end of the day. And it makes a person feel less of a human and not worthy of humane treatment, which can lead to symptoms of anxiety like post-traumatic stress disorder and even depression, because they don't know why it happened. This white male barged in, broke into the black student's race, creating fear, creating anxiety. It was unexpected. He was sleeping. So it's going to have some kind of traumatizing effect on him.
Now let's talk.
And how he views himself within the context of South Africa.
Now let's talk about recovery. How does an individual recover from an incident such as this?
It's very challenging and it's very tricky, because we're asking ourselves, why are we still going through this in the 21st century? Because the reverberations of apartheid still echo till today. He shouldn't have had to experience something like this. I think I heard a video clip where he said he did report it, but he felt dismissed. The black student felt dismissed when he reported the incident. So already he feels like the institution has failed him. He felt that nobody is really listening to him, nobody's hearing him, and probably that's why he went to post the video up online. And it definitely became viral. But for him, I guess, when he has to look at it on a much broader scale, he's looking at how does it affect him? How does it impact him as an individual and as a black child within South Africa? And the fact is, somebody broke into his race. And not only did that person break into his race, but violated him, violated his personal property. So that is going to trigger all these feelings that he has of, as I said earlier, anxiety and depression. And it's important that he is debriefed. He goes through trauma debriefing. He goes for therapy and for counseling in order for him to really express himself in a place where he doesn't feel judged, where he will receive unconditional positive regard, where he will be heard, which is very important, where no one is going to dismiss his experience at all. And that's what he needs. That's part of the initial steps that he needs to go through for healing, which is a long-term journey. Healing is not linear. It has its ups and it has its downs, and it's going to take time because the system has failed him.
Now let's talk about Tens du Toit, the perpetrator in this incident, and the fact that racism is not something that comes to us naturally. We're not born racist. Racism is taught. Now, how much of it comes from society, and how much of it actually comes from the family of the individual who's racist?
Well, a child grows up in a home, normally. That's how we see it. And their first point of contact is with their parents. And that child is exposed to the beliefs, the judgments, the biases of their parents. So as a child is growing up within that household, they are being bombarded with a lot of information. And as they go to preschool, you start to see implicit and explicit biases towards members of different races. Because where did they learn it from? From their parents. But developmentally, from a psychological perspective, children from the age of 6 and above normally start to, their moral rules, social norms, and their own personal choices or preferences start to mature. So what am I saying? I'm saying that they basically are starting to develop or discriminate between what is right and what is wrong, and also understanding the consequences or the implications of their own actions. So children do learn that. But as they grow up, they are faced with choices. He was faced with a choice. He's a 19-year-old white male in university, first-year university from my understanding. He had the right to make a choice. We don't grow up in isolation. As much as we may grow up in our particular household, we grow up in a community. As he grows up, he goes to school, he goes to primary school, high school. You interact with different people, different races. You get to understand the way, or you get to see how people experience life from their own eyes, from their own perspective, from their own race. So he was exposed to all of that. But at the end of the day, he made a choice. The parents, yes, they had a responsibility for his upbringing and probably some of the way he thinks and the biases and the judgments that he had. But the perpetrator has that responsibility of making a choice. He knows the difference between right and wrong. And every day we are given that opportunity to choose between right and between what is wrong, or between what is morally right and what is morally wrong. Apologies.
Okay.
So yes.
So let's go to the act of urinating on someone's personal property in the middle of the night. Now, there are various acts of racism that many of us might have encountered, whether it's a look or tone in which somebody speaks to us, which we might judge to be racist. But what are the implications of actually urinating on an individual's property? I mean, urine is waste, and I don't presuppose to be a psychologist by any stretch of the imagination, but the association of that, what does it say about this individual and what he was thinking when he did it?
I guess you're referring to the perpetrator, if
Correct.
I'm not mistaken. So, from what I understand, is that it was a complete disregard for the victim's human rights and dignity, and he has probably been brought up to believe that, because I remember there's a statement that he made from the video clip that I watched, where the black student was asking him, why are you doing what you're doing? And he said, this is what we do to black people, which speaks a lot about his context and where he's coming from. And he understands the currency of his race. There's that belief that they are superior to blacks and that blacks are inferior. So when he did what he did, peeing on the personal property of the black student, it was almost like he was exercising his belief about superiority, about the superiority of his race, which essentially led to dehumanizing the black student, the victim, of his human qualities and his human dignity.
Now, moving away from that, let's focus a little bit on Babalo and certainly other black students within Stellenbosch University that have made various appeals for this to be dealt with. If it is not dealt with, is there a likelihood or a possibility that they will take matters into their own hands? And when I talk about matters into their own hands, I'm talking about racism from their end. Will they use that as a means of retaliation? Is it a possibility?
There is a possibility that they will stand up for their human rights. Why do I say that? It's because people get tired of being marginalized. People get tired of experiencing racist attacks. People want to be free to do whatever it is that they want, to learn, especially in an institution such as Stellenbosch. But if they're constantly under attack, if they're constantly threatened and no one is doing anything about it, especially the institution where they should be protected, where they should have a right to learn, a right to housing, they instinctively are going to want to protect themselves if nobody else is going to stand up for them. And that is probably where we're heading to. It is probably what we're already seeing right now, is that people have had enough. We have fought through apartheid, but it seems like apartheid keeps rearing its ugly head once again, over and over again, into the generations. It's been seeped into the generations. And people are tired. Black people are tired of this. So what is going to happen is that people are going to stand up for their fundamental human rights. They're going to protect themselves at all costs, protect their physical self, their emotional self, their psychological self, because nobody else is going to do that. And as human beings, that's what we do. It is in our nature to protect ourselves at all costs. That's why we have what you call the fight or flight syndrome. What are we going to do in a situation where we feel threatened? Either we run away or we're going to stand and we're going to fight. And so that's what we're seeing in the generation today. People are speaking out. They're not afraid to speak out, because if they don't speak out, who is going to be a voice for the victims? Who is going to be a voice for those who are being threatened, who are being victimized? So what we're going to see essentially is that people are going to stand up for their rights at all costs until something is being done, until racism is dealt with appropriately, effectively, with the right ramifications put into place. Because a lot of the times people don't want to talk about racism. They want to sweep it under the carpet. They want to act like it doesn't exist, but it exists. People experience it, and we cannot minimize people's experience just because you don't see it. Imagine now if he did not take a video clip of it. It would have been hearsay. We wouldn't be having this discussion. So we are in that era where people have to prove what is happening to them at all costs. We all have to have our phones now, because unless you have significant proof, no one's going to believe you. So that is what is happening right now. They are going to fight for their fundamental human rights unless something is done and addressed about it.
Now, Deborah, you might have seen the last interview I had with the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Stellenbosch University. And one of the things that we talked about is what the university needs to do in order to deal with the issues of racism. And the question I'd like to ask you is, how do you feel the university should deal with it? I mean, how do you teach kids to unlearn racism when they come into an establishment? Because they're adults. They're finally on their own, can make their own decisions, which to a very large extent are based on their upbringing. So part of what the university needs to do is certainly for those children to unlearn those issues. Is it possible? If so, how can the university do that?
As I always say, racism is learned, and therefore it can be unlearned, regardless of age. So in summary, first of all, what is important is that we have to acknowledge that racism exists. It's important that the institution has to make sure that they make it known that racism exists, that it is not in the mind, it's not an exaggeration, or it is not anything other than racism. So we have to call a spade a spade. Number two, the universities can try to solve racism within the institution by making the right resources available for people, everyone, to understand the depth and the scope of unpleasant experiences that minorities, that Black people experience. It's important that people understand their experiences and not take it away from it and not minimize it in any way or shape or form. Thirdly, to defend and empower victims. This is very important, because this is why it will lead to people revolting and standing up for themselves, is because they don't feel that anybody is standing up for them. Nobody is defending them. Nobody is trying to keep them safe. So it's important that they have to put systems in place that would defend and empower the victims at all times. And the fourth point I want to make is that they have to make convenient and victim-friendly reporting mechanisms. When somebody wants to report an act of racism, at no point should they ever feel that they're being dismissed, or it's an imagination, or it's something that they should just, slide under the carpet. No, it should be taken seriously. It must be thoroughly investigated until proven otherwise. Take that person seriously. It is their experience that no one can take. Nobody wakes up one day and feels and wishes that they're going to be racially attacked. No. So they need to put in policies where the students can go and report it, and it's going to be dealt with effectively from that time that they come to report it.
Deborah, we're going to have to call time on the conversation. Certainly appreciate you making time this afternoon. Deborah Olusola, clinical psychologist, and unpacking for us the psychological perspective of racism in schools and obviously tertiary institutions.